welcome to Rutgers Business School. I am Lanier Richardson, the Executive Director of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development here. Let me just give you some numbers really quick. 91% of businesses are still operational. 214 jobs created. 56% increase in profit. A $28 million annual economic impact in the city and in our state. Those are the recent poll results from an entrepreneurship program that we run here at the business school, taking first-generation entrepreneurs and teaching them through coaching and counseling and mentoring in a 9-month boot camp how to grow. And we now have a 7-year track record of businesses still being profitable. And that's the work that we do here at the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship. Every day we think about the connection between entrepreneurship and economic development. And accordingly, it's why we welcome you here today as we talk about economic mobility. And we are pleased to have our esteemed colleagues and officials from the SBA and from the Senate and Senator Booker and the dignitaries who you'll hear from today. Let me start by saying we couldn't do what we do without the support of our Chancellor's Office and the Dean of our business school. So representing our Chancellor's Office today is our Vice Chancellor, Arcelio Aponte.
Thank you, Lanier. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. On behalf of Rutgers University Newark, I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of Chancellor Nancy Cantor. I am pleased to welcome the SBA Administrator, Maria Contreras-Sweet, Senator Booker, Professor Alan Gruger, and all of you today to Rutgers University Newark. Chancellor Cantor is attending a meeting in DC, and sorry she cannot join us today to engage in today's topic on economic mobility, entrepreneurship, and the opportunity gap. We know true economic mobility and the success of small business development are strongly correlated to the success of our university. Rutgers University Newark is not just in Newark, but of Newark, and we are committed to our anchor institution work here in the city. And critical to our anchor institution work is small business development. Whether it's support and research work out of the Urban Entrepreneur and Economic Development Center, or our work in partnership with our anchor institutions to increase local entrepreneurship and small business growth, we continue to welcome opportunities to expand our work and our partnership with all of you. And we look forward to our active participation in today's important inaugural forum. Welcome and enjoy the forum. Thank you.
Our Dean's Office, I don't know if they've made it down yet, but the Dean's Office is important because of our strategic plan. They've made creating social impact and connecting with entrepreneurship and connecting with economic development a key part of the business school's goals going forward. And so throughout the day, I hope to get an opportunity to introduce you to our Dean and to our Vice Dean. But with that, I want to get out of the way. We have a dynamic program here today. And so with that, I want to welcome to the podium our Administrator, Ms. Contreras-Sweet. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you all for coming out for what is our inaugural Small Business Big Think research series. We have done a lot of work at SBA, but we know that a lot remains to be done. I want to thank Lanier for the generous hospitality to join you here today. Thank you so much. And all of our friends at Rutgers for the ongoing work that they do around entrepreneurship and for hosting this first installment. We can all remember when small businesses were the linchpin in urban communities like Newark. Families lived in homes over these businesses. Neighbors met in them. Children got their first summer job from them. Little League teams were sponsored by them. But tough times have hollowed out our small business districts in many areas. The good news is our economy has added jobs for 66 consecutive months, and our national unemployment rate has fallen to a low 5.1. It's a 7-year low. But our youth unemployment rate is stubbornly troubling. It is twice the national average. Our African American unemployment rate is still at 9.1%. Entrepreneurship rates are more than 3 times higher for whites than for blacks. Only 13% of black business owners say they could get credit when they needed it last year. African American owned businesses average $72,000 in annual receipts. Compare that to $150,000 for Hispanics, compare that to $400,000 for Asian Americans, and compare that to $600,000 for whites. This opportunity gap limits the growth of our small business community and the growth of our economy and our country. The only way we can reach our full economic potential is by making certain that everyone has an access and a seat at the economic table. Dr. King once said, "What good is it to be able to sit at an integrated counter if we can't afford to buy the hamburger?" So as we think about our civil rights, we have to make sure that we're advancing market rights. More than half a century later, we still can't separate this fight for civil rights and for economic opportunity. At the Small Business Administration, we're not here to help folks buy. Hello, one of these two has to work. We're not here to help folks buy the hamburger. We're here to help them buy the restaurant. This conversation is about ownership, which leads us to social mobility and economic prosperity. We're here because President Obama calls entrepreneurship. Hello. Because President Obama calls entrepreneurship the most powerful force the world has ever known for lifting people out of poverty. It gives Americans from all walks of life the chance to be their own boss, to provide for their family and improve their lot in life. But for lower income Americans living in urban and rural communities, we see a stubborn opportunity gap. Barriers range from lack of educational opportunities to higher incarceration rates to the absence of affordable business capital. So today we've convened top thinkers from government, from academia, the business community, and the nonprofit sector. In the first session here this morning, we're going to hear from 2 outstanding leaders, thought leaders, national, in fact, I would say internationally recognized names here. Let me say that what we want to hear from them are solutions. Clearly, the SBA has done a big lift since I've arrived in April. We have zeroed out fees on loans under $150,000. We have engaged more lenders than ever in lending. We have made sure that we have put in technology that allows more people to have access to our loans. We have put in systems to make it easier for our lending partners to process loans. And while we've made important progress, we still see, as I said, this stubbornly low, abysmal numbers for our minority communities. And so I think that you're going to enjoy some of the solutions that I know that our participants are going to hear today. Number one, we're going to be delighted to we are delighted to be joined by Princeton Professor Alan Krueger, who helped guide America from recession to recovery as the chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. You know that he brings a wealth of experience both at the Department of Labor.
Put one down and you have one.
Yeah, you have one here, one here.
Yeah, one here. Or you can cut one off and put one off. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yep, one should go down.
I want this one on. Let's do this. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Testing. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Anyway, I was just to say that we have somebody who has been with the Department of Labor, the Treasury, academia, and of course the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, Professor Alan Krueger. Thank you for being here. Please come up. And you know that we have one of Washington's, indeed our country's most dynamic and thoughtful leaders on entrepreneurship, your very own home state senator. Please welcome up the Honorable Cory Booker. So you are both from New Jersey. Why don't you talk to us about what your town Newark looks like today from what it looked like when you were growing up? What changes have you seen?
Well, I mean, anybody who walks around Newark now can see an extraordinary transformation, and I love the fact that These two guys who were wearing Rutgers hats, Lanier and Arcilio, who spoke earlier, are masquerading as people in this institution doing things with Rutgers, but originally they worked for the city and worked for our Economic Development Corporation. So what's happened over the last decade in Newark is really stunning. We are a city that in the depths of the recession focused on very concrete strategies to empower what has become now the biggest economic development boom in the city, really since the 1960s, arguably since the 1950s. And that was a range of strategies. One, we partnered with a professor from a far inferior university in Princeton, Harvard University, to really identify what the competitive advantages were of our city. We doubled down on those competitive advantages from the eds and meds region to the port, transportation, logistics region. Really helped manufacturers, helped people get access to capital, worked on small business development, brought in developers, helped the pipeline of subcontractors, and I saw a Marjorie here as well. So there's been a lot of team effort in designing a city resurgence that's still ongoing. It's still a lot more work to do. That's why I'm really proud of the early great start of Mayor Baraka. But it's just exciting to see what's happening in Newark, both in the downtown, and most people don't realize, Arcilio Lanier will give you the data, that during the time I was mayor, about half of the investments and growth in business investment, supermarkets, you name it, going on in their neighborhoods as well.
Very good. Now, for our professor, your grandfather immigrated to this country, I understand, and you settled in about 25 miles from here. Tell us about what you see that was different from your family.
Well, my grandfather came to Newark from Austria around 1900. My father was born in Newark. I was born in Beckersville Hospital in Newark. When I was very small, my parents moved elsewhere in Essex County to Livingston, where I grew up. I worked one summer in Newark.
6 months, I think mine.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's very generous of you. My dad had worked in Newark most of his career. He went to Rutgers Business School here in Newark. So I've watched Newark mostly from afar, although with this strong connection. And the statistics for Newark are rather remarkable. When my family moved out just before the riots, Newark's population almost fell in half from then until the 1980s. The population has stabilized. Newark is beginning to go through a renaissance. I think it's long overdue. I think the work of Senator Booker contributed tremendously to the turnaround. I think it's very important for the state of New Jersey to see Newark to continue to prosper, to become a safer city, to be the shining city for New Jersey, the largest city in the state of New Jersey. I think Newark has not taken full advantage of some of the advantages, some of the attributes it has. The possibility of being a transportation hub the way Chicago is. The ability to attract business from New York, given how expensive New York is. New York has been doing very well in terms of education, and I think that's something which will also help in terms of higher education going forward. So I think Newark still has tremendous potential, and I think smart policy can help Newark to realize that potential.
But one, you're referencing an immigration that was occurring at the time, and now there's history of concern about immigration, and yet you're seeing other economies like Greece and Italy and France that have flatline populations. And so could you speak to the role that economic growth and the link to population growth?
Sure. The federal population is also the demographics of the city. Newark changed dramatically. The riots in the 1960s were a turning point, and Newark has been very slow to recover from that period in its history. Population is now about 250,000, a little bit over 250,000. That's been stable over the last 20 years or so. When I was born in Newark, population was about 450,000. And the mayor could say much better than I can, that having vacant lots is a problem for a city. And population growth, I think, is a sign of strength because it means the city is a magnet and people want to locate there, businesses want to locate there. I think that also helps to support property values, which makes the area prosper. So I think the fact that population has stabilized and has started to grow a little bit is a positive sign for Newark. I think Newark benefited historically from immigration. The waves of immigrants who came to the U.S. For opportunity helped to make the U.S. a stronger country and Newark a stronger country. One of my big regrets from when I worked in Washington is that we were not able to pass immigration reform. I think that's a problem for the U.S. Our demographic situation, looking at a nation as a whole, is we're in a stronger position than Europe and Asia, but we're still going to be aging rather rapidly, and we're going to have slower population growth, slower labor force growth. We're seeing that now. That's one of the reasons why we've seen labor force participation rate decline so much over the past 15 years. So I think if the renaissance in Newark continues, you're going to see expanding population growth in Newark, and I think that's long overdue, frankly.
In that regard, in terms of building wealth, I know that you've been tracking the speech, one of Janet Yellen's speeches on social mobility and the role that entrepreneurship plays in building wealth intergenerationally. Did you want to refer to any of that?
Sure. Let me recommend to all of you to read a speech that Janet Yellen gave a year ago at the Boston Federal Reserve Bank. The theme of her speech, which is unusual for a Federal Reserve chair, was on social mobility. And she highlighted 4 building blocks for social mobility. One is education. One is investment in children more generally. The third that she highlighted was entrepreneurship. And interestingly, and she did some research on the topic, which is also impressive for a chair of the Federal Reserve, what she found is that ownership of businesses is skewed much more to higher income folks, as you would expect, but less so than other assets. So business ownership is an important avenue for people to have upward mobility. Only 3% of families in the bottom half have a stake in a business. If you look at the next 45%, about 14% have a stake in a business, which if you look at the overall distribution of wealth, that's actually more evenly distributed. That 14%, the value of their business is extremely important for their overall wealth. The average is about $200,000. For the top 5%, over half have a stake in a business. So you can see that business ownership is highly skewed, yet less highly skewed than ownership of other forms of wealth. And one of the points that she highlighted is that business ownership, particularly for that 45%, has been declining. And I think it's very important that we have policies to reverse that. I think there are many factors that would explain this decline, which has been taking place for about 3 decades, some of which I think is demographic related. What she concluded is that entrepreneurship is a very important force for providing upward mobility. Doesn't work for everyone, but for a significant share of the middle class, it provides an important avenue for reaching the American dream and having upward mobility.
And it refers to her 4th pillar, which is that inherited wealth is also something that's contributing to wealth building in general. And so I guess that's the 4th point, is that if you have a business, you can also leave something for your children.
Thank you for reminding me of her 4th point. You're absolutely right. And we tend to think of inheritance as highly skewed, which it is. On the other hand, it's less highly skewed than ownership, say, of stock. And inheritance does help people because it gives them some cash to start a business, and you can also transfer a business across generations and families, which obviously does take place. So that interconnects, I think, with entrepreneurship.
And so in that regard, Senator, what we're seeing is that you have been working since you were mayor to attract more business, small and large, to your state and to your city, and you've been working to bring investment back to Newark. And you focus like a laser on the role of small businesses to economic growth. You've earned a national reputation around revitalization. Could you please tell us how you link entrepreneurship and economic mobility?
Sure. The first thing I really want to just mention is I wanted to pick up, I didn't want to let that immigration question go, especially because we're during a presidential season in which some people feel the need to, I think, cast aspersions on immigrants. But our economy is so fueled by immigration, and the immigration reform bill that the professor mentioned would have brought hundreds of billions of dollars to our economy in terms of growth and opportunity. We now know that other countries are trying to copy the strategies we've used in the past to grow America, are doing, in fact, one of my friends told me there's a billboard up in Silicon Valley that says, can't get your H-1B visa, come to Canada, because the other countries are recognizing the power and the strength of growth. And you said in your question about the flatlining of these European countries, it's really threatening their long-term economic growth. And don't even think of it in terms of even investors, and even entrepreneurs, businesses, and productivity. Also understand that over 70% of our economy is driven by consumption, and having more people helps to create more economic dynamism. Newark, which a few years ago turned a very important corner, which is the one the professor mentioned, decades and decades of population decline. The wonderful thing about the city right now is it's the first time in 60 years that our population is actually growing again, and in every way, that's a great sign for our community. But going back to what you said, we saw very clearly that the major driver of job creation in this country is not the large corporations. I had two parents that worked for IBM during the years I was growing up, but the major driver to job creation is small businesses. And so we began, even when I was mayor, and have now since with legislation I've introduced as a senator, to really focus on the challenges of small businesses and how they really help for social mobility. I'll never forget one of the last things I did my last year that I was mayor of Newark. We had already found out as we were going around, when I was asking small and mid-sized manufacturers, small businesses, what their biggest issue is, and this is something that you've been such a champion of, but I would hear things like fears about Obamacare, or concerns about things mayors should be concerned about, crime, safety, you name it. But the biggest concerns I heard were twofold. One was access to capital, and businesses just could not find it, strong, solid businesses. And the second one was finding qualified people. People, I'd walk in and say, what do you need? And they said, I need machinists. I can't find machinists. And so those two things became a cause for us when I was mayor, and now I've introduced legislation trying to focus on advanced manufacturing, trying to focus on access to capital, pushing the administration to continue their good work, and also obviously focusing on apprenticeship and skills training in this country. And so that's really something that was remarkable. When I did the last little anecdote I'll tell you is when we copied with a online lending group that does crowdsourced funding in the city of Newark. We brought them here, and we had our first press conference. And the first companies that were getting these incredible loans, micro loans of $5,000, I think the majority of the people that were there, I think pretty much all of them were women entrepreneurs, and most of them were first-generation immigrants looking to start businesses. And it was just exciting for me to see that if we could help them overcome that access to capital, they were going to be able to do great dynamism. This one particular online platform had repayment rates of these loans that were better than many banks were getting. So if we can find ways to address that need, I believe we can really give yet another lift to job growth, economic growth in our country.
I think that's right. I recall participating in that panel with you. Thank you for hosting me, by the way,
Yes.
for that panel. And I do recall how they were thinking about collateral in a very different way.
Yes.
Because at SBA, obviously, we're the USG, we're the U.S. government, and so we have to make sure that we're getting our taxpayer dollars back in the system. But they were talking about peer pressure was just as important as collateral. They
Yes.
said that when you post that, Mrs. Mary Smith has taken out a loan, she's gonna be concerned that her friends all know that she has not paid back, so she is gonna pay back. They talked about the importance of that transparency.
Right, and banks have changed from sort of the Altam days where we imagined them to be these local community banks where people know folks who, oh, my kids have played Little League with you for years and years and years. Now they're far more impersonal, and what a lot of these online platforms allow them to do is to use other data points to assess credit worthiness. And a lot of that often is that peer group of people that are recommending and vouching for it. And they found that making loans in that environment creates a lot more responsibility and accountability when it comes to repaying those loans. And I'm excited. I met here in Newark with some philanthropists about yet another small business crowdsourced loan funding program that's been really successful in New York. And I'm actually very hopeful for this new movement for small businesses that there's other non-traditional ways of getting access to capital. I have to say, though, that there are dangers to that as well, especially when you start looking at some of these online platforms, that we have to balance between real accountability on interest rates and people getting over their heads and very reputable platforms. If you allow me, I just want to pause because I know Donald Payne walked in, and whenever Donald Payne walks into a Newark, whenever there's a pain in the room, I've had pains in other areas, but whenever there's a pain in the room, we have to stop and give deference to the great Congressman Donald Payne Jr.
Well, let me say it's a real honor and privilege to be here for such a very important topic discussion. Madam Secretary, it's always an honor to have you in the great metropolis of Newark, New Jersey. To our regional director, who we're so very proud of. We claim her in Newark. She's from New Jersey, but we claim her in Newark as well, Kelly Ledette. To our senator, who is doing an outstanding job in reference to small business. And it's very interesting that the senator and I have both landed on the same committees in Congress. He's on Homeland Security, as well as I am, and also small business. And so there is a synergy there that we have in the delegation in discussing these issues. So just really delighted to be here to listen to this august group of individuals and learn something myself. We just had the CBC weekend, the ALC convention, and actually my small business forum was on access to capital. So there's absolutely a synergy in what the senator and I are trying to do in reference to small business and entrepreneurship throughout our district. So I'm just delighted to be here, and thank you for giving me a moment.
Why don't you introduce the mayor?
Oh, yes. We have with us the mayor of East Orange, Lester Taylor. And as I look across this room, I see so many familiar faces that had dedication to this community in terms of these issues for quite some time, and entrepreneurs themselves. So I'll get out of the way and let the experts speak. Thank you.
Something, and that is that we're talking about entrepreneurship as a vehicle for economic mobility, yet so many, what you just both referenced is that immigrants tend to create businesses at a higher rate. And it could be because of cultural barriers, that's the only way, because they're going to hit class ceilings pretty low in the process in government and corporate. So how do we get the general population to think of entrepreneurship as a tool? You know, for most of us that grew up, our parents were always saying, gee, I hope you get a good corporate job, so you have some nice benefits and health insurance. And now with Obamacare, we have more flexibility, right? So how do we get more young people to think about entrepreneurship as an alternative? Just fundamentally, you know, it's always, the conversation's always about employment versus ownership.
Well, let me say a little. The U.S. does have a tradition of entrepreneurship, which stands out when we look around the world. just look at television shows like Silicon Valley, which celebrates entrepreneurship. So you're absolutely right that immigrants are more likely to start businesses in the U.S. I think that's partly because they are less connected probably to the existing establishments, willing to disrupt existing sectors. But natives also create businesses at a fairly high rate compared to the rest of the world. I think what's important is that we have a system that can provide them with credit when they need it. That was severely impaired as a result of the financial crisis. It was very important, I think, that government stepped in, especially the SBA, to support more small business lending, because that was a serious problem in the recovery and continues to be a weak spot in the recovery. I think it's also important that the entrepreneurs have the sufficient business skills so that they can thrive. And increasingly, cities and states are requiring financial literacy in high school. I think it's difficult to teach financial skills at the high school level, but one of the areas that students, I think, really enjoy, I should give myself a plug, I have a high school textbook for economics and personal finance. One of the areas where students really enjoy learning and picking up skills is in terms of starting a business. And lastly, I would add, one of the consequences of the Affordable Care Act, of Obamacare, is going to be to make it easier for people to start businesses, because they're going to be able to get health insurance through exchanges. My dad started a small accounting firm when I was young, and I remember being scared that he was leaving his company here in Newark to start his own business. But also because my mother was a teacher in East Orange, we had health insurance through my mom. Now that enabled my father to start his business. I think of Obamacare at a larger scale, doing that for entrepreneurs throughout the country.
So first of all, that is a powerful thing about Obamacare that I just don't think is talked about enough, this job lock that, and I've known this, people who are afraid to leave their jobs because they had a sick child, and if they left their job to start their dream business, they would lose their health insurance. But I want to hammer a couple of more points. The professor continues to say he needs to learn a little bit more what politicians do about being a little more melodramatic when you're speaking. So allow me to add the melodrama and the emotion. But first of all, what he's saying about just that pipeline of preparing our young people for entrepreneurialism, we're finding is so important. Especially when you think about what the jobs and entrepreneurialism of the future is, and it's related to STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math. And the problem is that we are doing a bad job in America of developing minorities and women when it comes to STEM fields. We have incredible numbers for women who are now really dominating in college education field, but we're not seeing enough women go into the STEM subjects. So we have to start working on that pipeline. On the other end of that, and this is something my pastor, Reverend Jefferson, yes, that's a plug, so that I get treated better at church, but my pastor, Reverend Jefferson, and I talk about all the time, is that we still have glass ceilings of entrepreneurship. If you look at where the VC dollars are going in America, if you look at where a lot of the innovation dollars are being invested, they're not being invested you don't often see the representation from women and minorities that you would want to see. And there are other areas where you see that. Entertainment is a great example. There would be no multi-billionaire Tyler Perry if the movie industry actually had saw value in the African American community, and so he was forced to go a different route and was very successful as a result. The challenge is, for many tech startups, for many innovators, getting the attention of the traditional investors is very difficult. Dodd-Frank has a lot of good things in it, and one of them was just a requirement for transparency on lending. The cabinet secretary who's sitting next to me has done a great job of focusing accountability and transparency in SBA loans, and how many of those SBA loans are going to women, how many of those SBA loans are going to minorities, and working to improve that picture. But we do not have that kind of transparency on private banks, and Dodd-Frank in 2010 called for it, but we haven't done what's necessary to create the rulemaking so that we actually get the results that we need. So in July, I wrote a letter, and a number of my colleagues signed on it, really asking for us to have that transparency so that we can create that accountability. We cannot win this economic game in America if we're leaving so many people on the field, on the sidelines, and not getting them on the field. And I was at this wonderful conference 2 weekends ago, which is a conference for Black African American corporate board directors. And it was a really incredible thing to see a conference with hundreds of people from Fortune 500 companies would sit on the board. And the conversations were just about, are we pushing and asking the questions? How can we better push and ask the questions about how these companies, these major corporations, are thinking about diversity, not just in hiring, but in their business-to-business relationships. What companies are they hiring to do their accounting? What companies are they hiring to do their professional services? Because the challenge we have to understand in America is that the traditional wealth that's been created in this country, from middle-class wealth to business and corporate growth, has often come about at a time that those avenues were denied African American families. Think about some of the easiest ways. Newark is a great example of this. How people got into middle-class wealth. Well, one of it was through their homes. Well, when you had redlining and things like that going on, and FHA, government agencies that were discriminating against African Americans, families didn't make that wealth. Look at programs from the GI Bill, which had a discriminatory effect on African Americans and others. Many of the avenues to the middle class were denied African Americans. So let me give you one example of business growth that really disturbed me when I got to Washington. We in New Jersey, for example, have fund managers. These are people in the financial industries that when we have our pension funds in New Jersey under Corzine and even continued under Chris Christie. In fact, red state governors like Rick Perry, and I know the professor was very sad about the end of his presidential campaign, but they had a very diverse, they allowed so-called emerging managers to manage some of those funds. And remember, pension funds come from very diverse sets of workers. Well, when I got to the federal government, I was wondering, hey, this is the United States federal government. We must be better than states like Texas and others for diversity in our management. But actually, we were not. We had zero, none. None of the billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars were being managed by women or minority-led firms. And so this is why it's on every level of the pipeline, from education all the way up to allowing minority firms to participate in business opportunities and allowing them to have access to capital is really important for us to deal with what I think is a terrible legacy in our country of many of these populations not having the levels of wealth that we see in the general population.
You know, I think what you just said is, first of all, it deserves an applause. About 100 years ago, I served on this federal glass ceiling commission that addressed these issues. And what I'm concerned with is that things are not dramatically different from those days. And so I would challenge us. I came in because of that experience that I had, hearing anecdotally across the country from women and minorities about this artificial ceiling that was keeping them from accessing capital, from getting to the top jobs and entering the board governance. But it's not that different, and it's a mindset. And so what I'm asking, for example, I came into SBA, our loans, since I came on to today, our AFAM loans, our African American loans are up by 56%. Our Hispanic loans are up by 38%.
That deserves an applause.
It's still, I was in Silicon Valley, last week, and I still see that there's a dearth of women being able to access capital. And so I'm trying to understand, because the professor referenced the skill set, that we have to make sure that they have the skill set. But we find that even when they have the skill set, people have a different view. If a woman fails the first time, she has failed, she has a scarlet letter. If a man fails, it's like, you know what, but he's so talented, let's give him another chance. There is still an inherent bias across the country in terms of how people view minorities and how they view women versus the general population. And so I'm wondering if there is a nudge that needs to be done on behalf of government, academia. Is it a regulation, legislation? What can be changed to get people to understand that if we don't have everybody in the game, that pyramid that we all understand begins to invert? If we don't have these masses employed and working, you're gonna have fewer and fewer people working, more and more people unemployed. All of a sudden, the Social Security system bankrupts itself, everything else doesn't work. So we need to have everybody in the game to increase our productivity per person. What is the inherent problem that we're still experiencing today?
Well, let me give you the economic analysis. I think what you described is exactly right, and the statistics that you started with about black-owned businesses are really an eye-opener. I think they are a legacy of discrimination in the past and a legacy that's still with us. And I think our nation needs contributions from all segments of our society. And if you look at the changing demographics of the US, we need it even more than we did before. There's not a silver bullet. I think it is an entire pipeline that we need to make sure is working, from preschool all the way into the workforce and into starting business and viewing failure as a step along the way to success. So that's why I think programs like SBA, which help to provide more credit to underserved groups, are very important. It is still the case that most lending to small businesses takes place from smaller community banks. And even with online opportunities growing, which I think is exciting, although I think, as the senator said, carries a lot of risks in terms of exploitation for those who are borrowing, in terms of the online platforms not being sufficiently regulated and capitalized. So I think it will be the case going forward that community banks are going to be extremely important. The shift that we've had towards larger banks, I think, is inadvertently hurting smaller businesses. So doing more to support community banks where they develop relationships with borrowers in their communities, I think that will help. Making sure that large banks are paying or setting aside enough capital for the risks that they provide. In a way, it's a little bit like in economics, we think about taxing pollution because of the external harm that it causes. Well, we had a financial crisis that was caused by large banks and unregulated banks. So to make sure that we have the incentives right so that small community banks can continue to prosper, I think that will help provide more credit to women and minority entrepreneurs. But I think it's going to take more than that, as you said. I think we need to look at the whole pipeline because there's not going to be one magic bullet. I mean, just take the example which Senator Booker said, that there are more women enrolled in higher education than men now by a pretty wide margin. And they're actually starting the STEM fields. They're not finishing them. So they're getting into the pipeline, they're just not getting through it. So what steps can we take to make sure that we're not losing this human capital, which is what we're going to need for our economy to continue to prosper?
But you just raised an important point. That is because of Dodd-Frank and because of Sarbanes-Oxley and all the other regulatory construct that community banks find themselves in, there's been just a plethora of M&A activity. And so as a result, we don't have the character lending in the community anymore. And I think that's right. Is there a need to support a two-tiered banking system, a mentor-protege program? Could you give some specific things that you think, based on your experience, of what we could do specifically to support community banks?
I think we've gone too far in treating smaller banks as if they're part of the problem. And they, I think, have too much of a burden from the regulatory regime that we put in place. So I think we need to think about what can we do to streamline the paperwork for smaller banks, to reduce the capital requirements. And small banks are less risky to the economy. They're not systemic if they should fail. So I think they require a different regulatory regime. That's one area of policy that I would look at.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add just a point again. So we in this country, we want a level playing field, and we want everyone on the field contributing. And I just want to talk about one other area that is severely affecting communities like Newark in getting people into the game. So most people don't understand that if you have a criminal conviction in this country, your ability to be an entrepreneur is savagely undermined. Now think about this right now. We are in a nation that has about 100 million Americans now, in this hyper-arresting culture we have, About 100 million Americans now have arrest records alone, which we're closing in on 1/3 of our country. But the arrest rates, especially that have happened, you remember the prison population at the federal level has gone up 800% in just the last 20, 30 years. And what that means is that more people are being plowed into the system for doing things. I don't mean to be sound facetious about this or make light of it, but for doing things, getting arrested and criminal convictions, felony convictions for doing things the last 2 presidents admitted to doing. And so now you have a reality where there's no difference between blacks and whites, none, in drug use or drug sales. In fact, young white men have higher rates of dealing drugs than young black men. But the arrests, you are almost 4 times more likely to see, if you're African American, to be arrested for drug use or drug dealing than someone that's white. Please understand, at Stanford University, Pastor, I'm not, this is not a confession, Pastor. Pastor Jefferson, I want you to call me in for some prayer. But there was a lot of pot smoking and dealing going on, a lot of pot sales. And we weren't going into Oakland to buy our pot. Not me, Pastor. But privileged people were buying marijuana from privileged people, okay? And so nobody coming home from a frat party was being stopped and frisked for drugs. No dorm was being raided. No DEA investigations were going on undermining the pot ring at Stanford University. But yet in Newark, as a mayor, I participated in that, the over-incarceration of African Americans. So now you've got a tragic reality that you have an incredibly large amount of African Americans in this country have been plowed into the system. 1 out of 3 black men now will be arrested in their lifetime unless we change things. And what that means is, now imagine coming back from prison where you went as 18-year-old, you're now in your 20s and you want to clean up your life and you try to become an entrepreneur. The barriers to becoming an entrepreneur, I didn't even realize them until I became mayor. When I had people coming to me saying, hey, I applied for a New Jersey Transit job, got my uniform, they did the background check, I lost the uniform for something I did 18 years ago. I had somebody come to my office hours, I wanted to be a taxi cab, an independent contract, taxi cab driver, can't get a taxi license. Went to go for a loan from the bank, let them know that I was a former felon, couldn't get a loan from the bank. And so we are basically telling a system that is so skewed against African Americans, more likely to be arrested, more likely to be convicted, 20% more longer sentences. I can go on and on. Starts from the time there's a child for the same behavior in schools. Blacks are more likely to be expelled, see disproportionate discipline, all through the system that ultimately results in the crushing of the economic potential of young people in our communities who find it very, very difficult. And I was just out in the White House watching the Vice special that covered the president, who was the first, I'm shocked about this, the first president in United States history to visit a prison, even though all of us Christian presidents, and now hearing folks don't want Muslim presidents, but all of us Christian presidents believe in Matthew 25. Pastor, did I get that right? Please give me points, Pastor. About visiting people in prison. The first president that did that. But this Vice special comes to the streets of Newark and talks to guys who talk about the difficulties of being entrepreneurs with having a record. So in this idea of every part of this pipeline, I just want to make it clear that we are not dealing with a level playing field in America when it comes for opportunities for entrepreneurialism.
So to that point, why don't we start talking about the campaign afoot, which is Ban the Box. And SBA is becoming a big believer, and so what we've already done is in our micro lending, and you are one of our authorizers, so I want to say this in front of you. He's a key member of our Small Business Committee, Authorizing Committee. So let me just say, Senator, that we at SBA have now omitted that question, so that when you come in to apply for a micro loan,
I have a lot of cabinet secretary friends, but I have to say I love this cabinet secretary. She's phenomenal. And it's great.
But then concomitant with that comes the next question, which is, once we get them to capital, they still need the counseling, as we talked about in the preparation. And so one of the things that I know that you're also working on with our team is this idea of how we begin to use these special places that are spawning across the country, incubators or innovation centers, whatever nomenclature you want to assign to them. But the point is that because they don't think of the U.S. government, because the population that we're describing, the reentry population, doesn't think to come to the U.S. government for assistance, they're not coming to the SBA. So what we want to begin to do is to add people direct them into the places where they're most comfortable. And these innovation hubs is where they're going. And so what we're trying to do now is reach out to those places to make sure that they know about the USD ecosystem and all the resources at Treasury, at Commerce. And I know that you have a bill, you have legislation to help finance some of these centers to make sure that they become a part of the system.
And I really appreciate that. And I just want to be clear, not only do we have an extraordinary leader who in a very short period of time in her position has really taken on these issues headlong. In her previous life, she's done a lot for somebody that's only 30, but in her previous life, you were in banking and were such a great advocate in Los Angeles for minorities and women in your business. So you're just living an extraordinary life, and I'm just so pleased that the president chose you to be a part of his cabinet. But I want to also emphasize that people often view me as a Democrat. I've said time and time again that in New Jersey, I don't want to be the Democratic Center. I want to be the center for all folks. And this is a great issue because entrepreneurialism and business growth is not a partisan issue. And you find allies on both sides of the political aisle. This is an issue in banning the box that we were able to find allies on both sides of the aisle, especially because corporations were already leading in this case, from New Jersey's company Bed Bath & Beyond to Starbucks, to even Walmart, and understanding that this was wrong. 18 states have already moved, including New Jersey. But when I got to the federal level, again, we saw that people for federal jobs and contractors for the federal government, if you put them as total, it's the biggest employer in our country, were all asking at the beginning of an application process that question. People were checking the box. African Americans who go into the system, for example, have 60% less likely to have a callback if they have to check that box. And so what we did in a rare press conference last week, where we had a bipartisan, bicameral press conference. So you had everybody from Representative Issa to Elijah Cummings, people on both sides that were there, joined together to say that we were going to ban the box. In other words, not have that question asked until the end of the application process when you've gotten a conditional offering. It's a powerful way to make an impact. And I'm so happy that the federal government is not waiting for us to pass that legislation, that you're seeing it there. I had mentioned him earlier. I was just told he entered the room, and I would be remiss if I didn't introduce, I'm sorry to Mayor Taylor, but my mayor is here, who was extraordinary, who was just down at the White House. And I have to say that you were the star of that panel, because you just wouldn't accept mistruths, and you represented Newark so well. It was one of my proudest Newark moments to see Mayor Baraka down in Washington D.C.
Let me just, we have just a couple of minutes to take a question from the audience. Is there anybody in the audience that has? Please go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Center for Buku. My name is Maureen Mendoza. I've been an RN in nursing for 20 years. I'm a student at Rutgers University. I'm taking my doctorate in nursing. I'll be graduating next year. We are having a tremendous problem with healthcare. Mergers and acquisitions are so common. South Jersey is dead. I'm from South Jersey, and business is dead. How could you help us, Doctor of Nursing practice students who've been in the business for 20 years, help ourselves, our community, and healthcare at the same time? Have our own business. We're loaded with loans, student loans. Do we have to go for another loan to get our MBA to know how to start our own small business? And where could we find for help?
So I'm going to give a quick answer to that, but then I want to see if the professor has anything to add. Because the last point you made is another thing that undermines entrepreneurialism, which is that we have a nation now that's graduating people saddled with more college debt than ever before. College debt has passed by every other types of debt, from credit card debt to home loans, as being the number one debt. And we see that the behavior of people that are saddled by those loans is changing dramatically. It's affecting the housing industry, for example, because people aren't buying homes enough. And if you look at it, I like to look at us compared to our global competitors, because America, I believe we're number one, but the reality is when you look at some of our competitors, are doing a lot of things better. than us. This is one example. So in Germany, the cost of going to college is about 4% of median earnings. Canada, I think about 5 or 6. England, around 7. And in the United States, over 50% of median earnings to go to college. And so this is very troubling to me, and we've got to find a way to begin to rein in these costs. The solution that you often hear from people on the left side of the aisle is just more Pell Grants and more that, but well, that actually isn't necessarily the full picture of what needs to be done, because often that just provides more money and tuition keeps going up and up and up. We've got to figure out a way to keep the cost of college low, and there's a lot of good ideas that I'm supporting and have co-sponsored some legislation to do just that. But the other part of your question at the beginning was just, I don't know, Professor, if you see, Doctor and Professor, you're like my pastor, more titles than the Newark Public Library. But Professor, I don't know if the consolidations going around New Jersey of hospitals and these larger hospital systems that are developing, is that a good thing for our economy? Is that a bad thing for our economy? Do you have an opinion?
Consolidation that's going around in New Jersey is taking place nationwide. It's probably been accelerated by the Affordable Care Act. I think it, on net, will probably help in the sense that we'll be able to realize some efficiencies in terms of healthcare provision. At the same time, I worry about nurses being exploited. Let me mention, there was just a very important legal settlement in Detroit where the Detroit hospital had been colluding to keep nurses' salaries low. In economics, we call this monopsony, where they had a lot of vacancies, but they weren't raising wages. In fact, they were keeping salaries low, working with other hospitals to set scales that were below what the market would generate. And I worry that this practice is common nationwide. So I think it's very important that the Justice Department be active in this area to make sure that the nurses are getting paid what they deserve and what the market should be generating. Also, I think we can solve a lot of our healthcare problems in the U.S. if we allow nurses to do more, to provide more care to patients where they don't need the higher priced doctor to provide it. One comment I want to make on the student loans, I do think we need to think about bankruptcy for student loans. Why do we treat student loans so different than we treat other debt? And also, one policy which has been expanding very rapidly in the U.S. has been income contingent loans. About 1 million students a year are now converting over, where instead of paying a fixed amount, they're paying a fraction of their income. And I actually don't know for entrepreneurs if they can do that, but that's something to look into if they are excluded, because entrepreneurs provide such a benefit to the economy at large.
And let me just add one more thing, because you reminded me about bankruptcy laws, which I believe have changed for the worse. But one other thing is just the fact that we should be able to, this is one of the bills I co-sponsored, was to refinance student loans. I mean, we have people in New Jersey right now with interest rates so low paying well over 10% on their student loans. It's outrageous. You can refinance a home loan, you can finance your credit cards, but they're not being allowing people to refinance student loans. It's making New Jersey spend thousands of dollars more that they shouldn't have to.
Well, I think you've just raised an issue that is across the government. You know, we should all be paying attention. Number one, what you're referring to is this challenge that we have because we have a need for more nursing, and what we're doing is we're importing them as opposed to developing our own talent here domestically. So I think that's an issue that we need to address. Second, what you're talking about is that, again, we have to continue to build this notion of fail fast that we see in Silicon Valley to help people start a business. And as the senator said, if they don't make it the first time, let's support them. Let's not put a scarlet letter on them, and let's say, how can we give them a second chance? Spain, for example, just put on a new law on the books that is called the second chance. We need to study what's going on globally to understand what we can do to help students begin entrepreneurship and be able to file a second time for access to capital without being burdened. And so I think that's an important issue. But third, down to the specific, I'm also going to introduce you to Kelly Ledette so that while we're creating systemic solutions, we can make sure that we're giving you the proper counseling to navigate through your journey of entrepreneurship. So our regional administrator is here.
I'm a middle class, so I don't get any benefits. I'm so healthy, I haven't accessed healthcare except for my blood, but I have to pay $1,000. So I'm a loser here. I'm a middle class who's well educated, who's making 6 digits, but still broke. How come?
All right, well, thank you for that. Please, go ahead.
My name is Rena Shanawani. I run the Women's Center for Entrepreneurship. It's a women's business center in Chatham, New Jersey. So I just wanted to thank you for your point that it's true that women do indeed suffer from a greater fear of failure than the rest of the population. So having women's business centers specifically targeting women to help them overcome those barriers is definitely very, very helpful. I also wanted to bring up a point as well. You mentioned immigrants.
You're making the point that SBA has women business centers.
Yes,
just to be
yes,
clear,
and,
so that everybody else
thanking
knows.
and thanking the SBA for supporting the women's business centers because, and I think it's actually a really good point to try and help target maybe second chance women to go forward and try and encourage them to take the second chance. I also wanted to thank your point about immigrants because before my role here, I was working in Syria, and I know that the government just welcomed 10,000 Syrians to come in and resettle in the United States, and Syrians are also one of the most entrepreneurial people, especially going back to the Silk Road. So I wanted to thank the SBA and the government for supporting both women's business centers and for welcoming Syrians.
As I've traveled the country, as I've traveled the country, I see more and more mayors embracing this idea and developing welcoming cities programs.
Yes.
Because they understand, as we pointed out earlier, the importance of having continued population growth. So thank you for that point. Well, listen, let me just say, our frame at the SBA has been smart, bold, and accessible. And essentially what that refers to is the smart technologies that we have to deploy to make sure that entrepreneurs are well equipped to be able to deal with the modern challenges of today's entrepreneurship journeys. Second, the bold, which is we have to help small businesses take bolder steps into international markets, and we didn't get a chance to talk to this. We'll do that again in round two. But I think that this notion of the globalized marketplace, how do we help small businesses feel comfortable in engaging in the international borderless marketplace that we now find ourselves in? And the A is what we were focusing on here today, is about making certain that all of the USG, the US government programs, are available to everybody, that we are accessible to everybody. And so today we address the underserved community, but we have to continue to focus on our changing population. The encore entrepreneurs who are now looking also for a second act. We have to make sure that we are addressing our vets as they come back into civilian life. And so I hope that you'll stay tuned for more and more work and thought. But all of you, I hope that you'll engage in the conversation. You can always reach me at MCS4Biz on Facebook or Twitter. And certainly our website is up. I hope that you'll go to sba.gov to learn more about what we're doing and continue the conversations, because what we're now going to do is a quick last round to say to these two wonderful panelists, we want to know, what is the big thing? Knowing what you know about SBA, you are our oversight committee, and you were in the White House providing us direction as we got through a very tough period in America's history. And so you must have something that remains undone that you think is an opportunity for the SBA and for our country. Senator.
Well, before we close out, can I ask a point of privilege? Is after we give that response to this, can we have the mayor of the city close us out?
Absolutely.
And I'm just going to be very brief because I know time is late. But a lot of the incredible work that's going on in entrepreneurialism, there are barriers that we need to work to remove, and I'm so proud of what the Secretary has done. But I just want to let the host know the other problem we have is just awareness of what opportunities are out there, letting people know that there are pathways, that for every barrier there's often people that are helping to build ladders to get over that. So a lot of the information we share here is very valuable. One of the things I learned when I was mayor was that most Newarkers could probably earn about 10% more in income and benefits because they didn't know about programs like the child care tax credit and things like that. The participation rates were very, very low in the earned income tax credit, for example. And so a lot of these things that we have out here in the United States, we need to make more awareness. Now that doesn't in any way counter for all the things I talked about before, the unlevel playing field, the need to deal with reporting big banks and consolidation, all of those things we need to work on. But we are activists. We have a tremendous amount of power to allow people to understand what can be done and to mentor others for those of us who've made our way.
Professor, we have seen, for example, in transportation, I think everybody has seen when they've gotten in on an airplane that there is this new attitude about on-time departure. That was not a law, that was transparency. That was putting out numbers that said this airline does better than this airline, scorecard. And that has driven so much behavior. Is there a scorecard? Is there something that would empower
the borrowers, the prospective entrepreneurs, what is left to be done that you think we could pick up and run with?
Let me mention a few things. On the issue of a scorecard, we could do a better job evaluating SBA programs. I think SBA did a heroic job standing up and providing more guarantees for loans for small businesses when the private sector pulled back in 2009, 2010, and continues to do that today. But we could use big data and do much more analysis to show that those who are getting loans because of SBA, how are they faring compared to those who are not? I think this is a very important part of SBA's mission to do what we call quasi-experimental evaluation. You could look at those who just didn't qualify, just missed, compared to those who just made it. How much of a difference is the credit making in their lives? What's happening to those who are not getting credit available? And I think that would provide very useful information for policymakers, for Congress, to determine where to put additional resources to expand credit to make entrepreneurship more accessible. So that's one lingering issue that stuck with me after working at the White House. I have to say I was very impressed by the way that SBA was able to expand during the crisis. We saw that also with FHA. And I think one model we should think a little bit about in the government is having institutions that spring up when the private sector pulls back. When home lending went away during the crisis, FHA became the entire market. And we're going to face a major issue about the GSEs. What do we do with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac going forward? And I think that's one type of a model to consider. And I think SBA very much fulfilled that role. And we can think about how to make sure that SBA is ready in the future in case we should encounter more difficulties in the private sector financial markets. And then finally, I want to give a plug for the Small Business Lending Fund. I give this plug in part because I like to think of it as my idea, but it's one of those things where it took an entire team to make sure that the Small Business Lending Fund came about. The Small Business Lending Fund, as you know, because your bank took advantage of it, provided capital to banks at a 5% dividend rate. If the banks increased their small business lending by 10% or more, the dividend rate fell to 1%. If they reduced their small business lending, the dividend rate went up to 7%. It was a penalty. Congressional Budget Office scored this as making money for the federal government. It actually had made money for the federal government. One of the problems is, what do you do with the money? That was actually an issue because there was a pay for, and then no obvious use for the pay for, which is a problem you'd like to have today. And the program was a little bit slow to get off the ground. FDIC was slow to implement it, but over 300 banks took advantage of it. $4 billion in capital went to the banks. Over $15 billion increase in small business lending from those banks, a 50% increase in their small business lending. So here we had a government program which changed the incentives, increased the incentives for community banks to lend more to businesses in their communities, raise money for the government. So I think that's something that we can think about having another round of.
I think that's terrific. And what I'm hoping that the senator will also work with us on in the future is also how we not just double down, but quadruple down on the micro dollars we put out to begin to build that pipeline to capital.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Lender ready, and it's got to start at the entry point. Ladies and gentlemen, please give these two fine gentlemen.
Thank you very much. And if I can invite really a man in a very short time who's become nationally recognized as one of the greater mayors in America, who's doing extraordinary things for the city of Newark, Mayor Ras Baraka.
I thought if I came late, they wouldn't make me speak. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I want to thank the SBA for having this. I want to thank Senator Booker for being at the forefront of this issue, and Rutgers Business School for the work that you guys have been doing in this city for a tremendously long time. It's been helping a lot of small businesses get what they need in order to be successful here in the city of Newark. We just left a meeting with Newark Alliance talking about jobs, and more jobs, but the piece that we did not really talk about at length was about small business development, which is very important to our city. However, Otis Goldie, who's in the back, and Baye, who's part of our economic development team, did talk about the incubators that we started in the city of Newark to begin to encourage small businesses. We took people through boot camp, through school. We're doing this in every ward to get people ready for the small business world. We know that in the country, small businesses hire or is the lifeline of the country, and we know in Newark it'll be the lifeline of this city. We have a bunch of small manufacturers who we are trying to help with the expertise and expansion so they can hire 5 or 6 more Newarkers to get us to our goal. So we are working feverishly to make sure that small businesses are growing, that they're successful in Newark. And last week we opened about 3 or 4 new small businesses in the city. They may need some SBA help with payroll and some other things, so if we could talk to you to help them stay afloat. So thank you for coming out and be a part of this. Again, thank the Senator for his untiring efforts in this area. We need it desperately in the city of Newark and in this country. And again, thank the SBA and Rutgers. God bless.